Can you imagine a single heartbeat flipping your whole world inside out? That's what happened to me. It was a day so plain you'd forget it. Soft sunlight, birds chirping, until I wandered into that room. The door wasn't shut tight, just a sliver of space beckoning me, and something in my gut twisted. I could have backed off, let it be, kept my nose out. But no, I stepped forward. And when I saw what was waiting, I knew life as I knew it was done for. The worst part? I'm the one who kicked it off. I opened the door, and I didn't close it. Tom was out fixing cars at the garage that morning. The house was a hush, almost eerie, until these faint little sounds floated down from upstairs. Riley was up there, my stepson, 22, all grown up now. I didn't dwell on it much at first. He's probably fiddling with something, I thought, lost in his own head like always. Maybe he'd want some tea, a quick hello to break the quiet. So I headed up, shoes whispering on the steps, tracking those noises. They were subtle, sneaky, tugging me toward his room. Then I spotted it. The door, nudged open just enough to tease. I stopped, ready to say, "Riley, you around?" But my voice died before it started. There he was, sprawled on his bed, phone propped in his hands, its light washing his face in a cool, sharp glow. His fingers danced, quick, intent. And I thought, oh, he's just scrolling, caught up in some silly video. Then I shifted closer, peering past the doorframe, and my chest went cold. I saw it clear as day, what Riley was really up to. The phone screen wasn't some random clip. It was private, raw, unguarded. A shiver sliced through me, icy and quick. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't want this snapshot stuck in my brain. Riley must have felt the air change because he jolted, fumbling to dim the sound, his hands a frantic mess. Too late. Our eyes crashed together. His face flared red, panic spilling out like spilled ink. I didn't. Sorry, he stuttered, staring at the floor. I was stuck, feet heavy, words tangling up. The door. I tried, but what was I even getting at? A weird flush climbed my neck. Awkwardness, yeah, but something sharper too, something I couldn't grab hold of. I spun around, practically tripping out of there, my pulse banging like a drum. I pressed my hands to my face, gulping air. What was that? I muttered. Why didn't I knock? Why'd I barge in like some fool? But then, wait, Sarah, I snapped at myself. Was this all my mess? Riley was 22, not a little kid anymore. Me, I'm 45, no stranger to life's stumbles. I've tripped over shame plenty, but this was a whole new beast. I hovered in the hall, breath ragged, raking fingers through my hair to steady myself. Then Riley poked his head out, tugging at his hoodie strings, coughing nervously, eyes glued down. Sarah, I'm sorry, he said, voice wobbly but true. I thought I'd locked it. I shook my head fast, dodging his gaze. No, I should have knocked first. I rushed out, stumbling over it. Quiet dropped between us, but it wasn't normal quiet. We'd been under this roof for years, Tom, Riley, me, but this felt alive, buzzing. I faked a grin, mumbling, "Guess I'll go fix some lunch." My tone shook as I shuffled downstairs, his stare trailing me like a thread about to snap. That night we sat at the table, plates clinking, soup steaming, but our eyes wouldn't meet. Something hummed beneath it all, restless and real. We should have talked, hashed it out. I knew it, he knew it. But where do you even start? Days rolled by and we played it cool, normal on the surface, a storm underneath. That stillness between us? After Riley's fumbled apology in the hallway, I couldn't shake it. His red face, the phone's glow, that awful electric moment. I'd scrambled downstairs to mess with lunch, chopping carrots, boiling water, anything to keep moving, to shove it out of my head. But it stuck there, looping like a bad dream. Why'd I linger at that door? Why did my skin buzz like that? I told myself it was done. Riley was mortified, I was mortified, case closed. But my gut knew better. This wasn't finished, not even close. Tom rolled in that night, grease on his hands, griping about a busted engine while I stirred pasta, half nodding. Riley didn't show for dinner, stayed holed up in his room. I should have been glad. No awkward stares over the table, but instead, it ate at me. The house felt too empty, too hushed, like it was waiting for something. Sleep didn't come easy. I lay there, Tom's snores rattling the bed, my eyes tracing cracks in the ceiling. Every groan of the old house made me flinch. Was Riley up too? Was he replaying it like me? Morning hit, and we dodged each other. Me by the sink, him snagging toast, no chatter, just quick skittish looks that never stuck. Days bled together like that, a tense little game of pretend. We acted fine, but the act only sharpened the edge. I started noticing him more, how he'd slouch by the fridge, thumbing his phone, or how his voice dipped when he laughed at some dumb show. He wasn't the scrawny kid Tom dragged home years back. He was someone else now, and I hated that I saw it. Then it snapped. I was on the couch, thumbing through a book I wasn't reading, when Riley dropped down beside me. Not across the room, not at the kitchen counter. Right there, his leg brushing mine. It was nothing. Accidental, but it jolted me. My book crinkled in my hands. He didn't meet my eyes at first, just stared at his sneakers, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. "Sarah," he said finally, voice rough, like it hurt to get out. "That day, what you saw, I can't get it out of my head." My mouth went dry. I should have brushed it off, made a joke, bolted, but I didn't. I sat, pinned, heart thudding too fast. He turned to me, eyes dark, restless. "I'm sorry, all right? I didn't want you to catch me like that. I feel so stupid." His words were raw, unguarded, and they slammed into me. I tried a smile, lightening it. "Riley, it's okay. I've had my own dumb moments, like when I spilled coffee all over Tom's paperwork." He smirked a little, but it faded quick. "It's not just that," he said softer, like he was stepping onto thin ice. "There's something else." My insides knotted. Something else? What was he dragging up now? I should have shut it down, stood up, left the room. But that itch, that dumb, dangerous need to know, kept me there. "What do you mean?" I asked, voice a thread. He rubbed his jaw, stalling like he'd said too much and couldn't rewind. Then he breathed deep, eyes sliding away. I've caught you too. Before. You didn't know." It hit like a slap. My breath snagged, a spark racing through me. Shock, yeah, but something warmer too. "What?" I whispered, barely there. He pushed on, face burning but voice firming up. "It was a while ago. I didn't plan it, I swear. But I saw you once, and it's been stuck with me ever since." My brain scrambled. When? Where? What had he seen? The room shrank, air turning soupy. I stared at him. He stared back. And just like that, we weren't stepmom and stepson anymore. That old safe distance, it vanished. And neither of us reached to pull it back. After that, everything bent. I'd catch myself watching him. How he'd linger in the doorway. How his hands moved when he talked. We'd sit through movies together, closer than before, elbows almost touching. Once, his fingers grazed mine on the armrest, and we both let it hang there, unspoken. Tiny moments, meaningless on their own, but they piled up, smashing whatever wall used to stand between us. And then he dropped something else, something that shoved us past the point of no return. Riley's words clung to me like damp clothes. "I've caught you too." They echoed, loud and relentless, every time I tried to shove them down. When had he seen me? What had he seen? I didn't dare ask. Not yet. That day on the couch, I'd just sat there, stunned, the air between us crackling. He'd looked at me, waiting for something, anything, but I gave him nothing but silence. And that silence? It carved a path we couldn't unwalk. After that, the house felt different, smaller, tighter, like it was closing in. I'd spot Riley in flashes, leaning on the counter, sipping coffee, or sprawled on the recliner, scrolling his phone. Things I'd ignored for years suddenly stood out. His broad shoulders, the way his hair fell messy over his forehead. He wasn't Tom's little shadow anymore. He was present. Too present. And I couldn't stop seeing it. He started hanging around more, offering to grab the mail, asking about my day over breakfast. Casual stuff, but it wasn't casual. Every word carried weight, every glance stuck too long. Tom didn't catch on, thank God. He'd stumble in from the garage, muttering about oil changes, while I nodded, my mind drifting to Riley's voice, Riley's eyes. One evening, we ended up on the couch. Me and Riley, some old action flick blaring. Tom was out cold upstairs, the house dim except for the TV's jittery light. I barely followed the plot, too aware of Riley next to me, his arm slung across the backrest, his knee brushing mine. Our breaths fell into rhythm, slow and heavy, and when my fingers grazed his accidentally, we both froze but didn't pull away. It was nothing, just a flicker of contact, but it woke something in me, sharp and restless. I told myself it was nonsense, a trick of my tired brain, but then I'd catch him staring. Not quick peeks, but deep, steady looks that prickled my skin. And I didn't break them either. Sleep turned into a fight after that. I'd lie awake, Tom rumbling beside me, my thoughts spinning. Riley was just down the hall, awake too maybe, thinking about me, about whatever he'd seen. It was a mess, guilt twisting with curiosity tugging me under. One night, it boiled over. I couldn't keep drifting like this. Whatever was growing, it had to stop. I needed to say it. Riley, this isn't right. So I slipped out of bed, the floor chilling my bare feet, my pulse racing like I'd run a mile. His door was ajar again, same as that first day, soft light leaking out. I crept in, ready to shake him awake, draw the line, but there he was, asleep, stretched across the bed, sheets kicked down to his ankles. His shirt was off, the lamp painting his skin gold, and my eyes locked on him, his chest, steady and slow. My breath hitched, too loud in the quiet. I shouldn't have been there. I should have spun around, left, locked it away, but I didn't. I stood, staring, a rush flooding me. Shame, sure, but something fiercer too, rooting me there. He shifted, murmured something soft, and I fled, heart pounding, diving back into bed like nothing happened. But that picture, Riley, bare, unguarded, it burrowed in, deep and stubborn. Next day I dodged him hard, stayed in the kitchen, buried in chores. But that night he stumbled home late, drunk, loud, crashing into the entryway. The door slammed, a lamp toppled, and I bolted upright, yanking on a sweater. Tom didn't budge, he'd sleep through an earthquake, but I couldn't let Riley wake him. I found him swaying in the hall, grinning sloppy and loose. "Sarah?" he slurred, eyes hazy. "You're real, right?" I grabbed his arm, whispering, "Hush, come on, you're a mess." He leaned into me, warm, heavy, his breath grazing my ear. "You're so damn nice," he mumbled, words thick but cutting. My stomach flipped. I hauled him to the kitchen, muttering about water, hands shaky as I filled a glass. He slumped into a chair watching me, that grin still hanging on. "Always this pretty?" he asked, voice slow and low. I fumbled the glass, water splashing the counter. This was slipping, fast. They shouldn't have landed like they did, soft and heavy, but they stuck anyway. I wiped the counter, avoiding his glassy stare, telling myself it was just the booze talking. He'd forget by morning. I'd make sure I did too. But even then, I knew it was a lie. The next day, he was quiet. Hungover, probably. Slouched at the table with coffee, barely looking up. I busied myself with dishes, keeping space between us, but the air still felt charged, like a wire humming under the floor. Tom shuffled in later, oblivious as ever, grumbling about a late shift while I nodded, my mind elsewhere. Riley didn't say much, just sipped his drink and slipped out, but I caught his eyes flicking to me, quick, sharp, like he was testing something. That look stayed with me, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Days after that, we fell into a strange rhythm. Close, but not too close. He'd linger in the living room while I read, or I'd find excuses to pass his room, door shut tight now. It was small stuff. Him grabbing a snack while I cooked, me asking about his day. But it built up, layer by layer, until the space between us wasn't space anymore. It was something else, something thick and unspoken. One afternoon, it shifted again. I was folding laundry in the den, the house still except for the hum of the dryer, when Riley came in. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching me. I kept my eyes on the shirts, folding slow, but I could feel him there, steady and close. "Sarah," he said finally, voice low, careful. "You ever think about it?" My hands paused mid-fold, a sock dangling limp. "Think about what?" I asked, though I knew damn well what he meant. He stepped closer, boots scuffing the floor. "That day, what you saw, what I said after." My throat tightened. I should have shut it down, changed the subject, walked out. But I didn't. I looked up, meeting his eyes. Dark, searching. No trace of that drunken haze now. "Riley," I started, voice thin. "We don't need to." He cut me off, not loud, just firm. "I do. I think about it all the time." The room felt too small, the air too warm. I set the sock down, hands shaky. "You shouldn't," I said, but it sounded weak, like I didn't believe it myself. He took another step, close enough I could smell the faint tang of his cologne. "You don't?" he asked, almost a challenge. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. Because he was right. I did. Every night, every quiet moment, it crept in. His phone, that glow, his confession on the couch. And now, standing there, he wasn't backing off. Neither was I. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Tom's snores filled the room, but my mind was on Riley. Down the hall, maybe awake, maybe not. I kept seeing him in the den, that look in his eyes, the way he'd closed the gap. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something heavier, pulling harder. I got up, restless, pacing the kitchen in the dark, the clock ticking past midnight. The house was silent, but it wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. The next morning, Riley was different, bolder somehow. He found me in the garage sorting old boxes Tom never touched. I was crouched, dusty, when he walked in, shutting the door behind him. "Need help?" he asked, but his tone wasn't about boxes. I stood, brushing my hands on my jeans, heart kicking up. "I'm good," I said. But he didn't move. He just watched me, steady, like he'd made up his mind about something. "Sarah," he said, stepping closer. "We're past pretending, aren't we?" My breath caught. The garage smelled of oil and cardboard, but all I felt was him, too near, too real. I should have said no, pushed him back, kept it safe. But my feet stayed planted and my voice wouldn't work. He reached out, slow, his fingers brushing my arm, just a graze, but it burned. And then the door creaked, Tom's truck pulling in. Riley stepped back, quick, casual, but his eyes didn't leave mine. We didn't say it out loud, but we both knew. Something had started, and it wasn't stopping. Tom's truck rumbling into the driveway snapped the moment like a twig. Riley's fingers on my arm, that burning graze, gone in a blink. He slid back, casual as anything, grabbing a box like he'd been helping all along. I turned fast, fussing with a stack of junk, my pulse hammering so loud I swore Tom'd hear it through the walls. He didn't. He barged in, sweaty and loud, complaining about a flat tire, oblivious to the air still crackling between me and Riley. "Hey kid, grab me a beer," he barked, and Riley nodded, slipping out without a glance. I stayed behind, pretending to sort, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. That touch, it wasn't nothing. It was a line crossed, and we both felt it. After that, Riley got quieter, but not distant. Sharper, like he was watching for cracks. I'd catch him in the hall, his eyes lingering a beat too long, or he'd brush past me in the kitchen, close enough to feel the heat off him. It wasn't loud or obvious, Tom never blinked, but it was there, steady, building. I tried to bury it, scrubbed counters, baked bread, anything to keep my mind off him. But it didn't work. Every creak of the stairs, every time his door clicked shut, my head snapped up, wondering. One evening, Tom was out late, some job running long, and the house settled into a heavy quiet. I was in the living room, flipping channels, when Riley wandered in. He didn't sit across like usual. He dropped right beside me, thigh brushing mine on the couch. The TV droned, some cop show, but I couldn't hear it over my own heartbeat. He didn't say anything for a while, just leaned back, arms stretched along the cushion, fingers inches from my shoulder. Then, soft, he said, "You didn't answer me earlier." I kept my eyes on the screen, gripping the remote. "About what?" I muttered, though I knew. He shifted, turning toward me, voice low. "If we're past pretending." My stomach twisted. I should have laughed, brushed it off, sent him upstairs. But the words stuck, and the room felt too warm, too tight. "Riley," I started shaky, "this isn't—" He leaned closer, cutting me off without touching me. "Don't say it's nothing. I see how you look at me." My breath hitched. He wasn't wrong. I did look, more than I'd admit. Those nights awake, that day in the garage, it wasn't just him pushing. I was there too, teetering on the edge. The TV flickered, casting shadows, and his hand moved, slow, deliberate, resting on my knee. Not gripping, just there, warm through my jeans. I froze, every nerve screaming, but I didn't pull away. "Riley," I whispered, more plea than protest. He didn't flinch, eyes locked on mine. "Tell me to stop." I couldn't. My mouth opened, but nothing came, because part of me didn't want him to. The front door rattled. Tom, home early. Riley's hand slid off, quick and smooth, and he leaned back, grabbing the remote like we'd been arguing over channels. Tom stomped in, tossing his keys, grumbling about traffic. "What's on?" he asked, oblivious. I mumbled something, heart still racing, while Riley shrugged, playing it cool. But when Tom turned away, Riley's eyes flicked to me, dark, knowing. That night I lay awake again, Tom's snores steady beside me, my mind a mess. Riley's hand on my knee burned in my memory, a quiet dare I hadn't answered. I should have ended it, told him no, set the boundary. But I didn't. And the next day he pushed harder. I was in the backyard, hanging laundry, the sun dipping low, when he came out. He didn't preamble, just walked up, close, his shadow falling over me. "Sarah," he said, voice rough. I meant it. I'm not pretending anymore. I clutched a damp shirt, wind tugging at it. "Riley, we can't." He stepped closer, towering now, his breath brushing my hair. "Why not? You feel it too." My hands shook, the shirt slipping. He caught it, fingers grazing mine, and held it there, our hands tangled in wet cotton. Tom was inside, feet from the door, but out here, it was just us. Too close, too real. I pulled back, shaky, muttering, "This is wrong." He didn't argue, just watched me steady, like he knew I'd waver. And I did. That night, Tom crashed early, and I found Riley in the kitchen, alone, the house dark. He looked up from his phone, and before I could think, he was on his feet, closing the gap. "Sarah," he said, soft but sure, "we're not done." His hand found my wrist, warm, firm, and the air turned thick, pulling me in deeper. The house was dark, Tom snoring upstairs, the hum of the fridge the only sound besides my pulse thudding in my ears. His eyes held mine, sharp and certain, and that we're not done, hung heavy between us. I should have yanked free, walked away, locked myself in my room. But my feet didn't move, and my voice stayed trapped. His grip softened, thumb brushing my skin. Just a flicker, but it sparked something wild in me. Then he let go, stepping back, leaving me breathless and shaky against the counter. The next morning, he acted normal, too normal, grabbing cereal, joking with Tom about some football game. I kept my head down, stirring coffee, but every time he moved, I felt it, his presence, his quiet confidence. Tom didn't see a thing, laughing through his toast, while I burned under the weight of last night's almost. Riley didn't push again, not right away. He let it simmer, watching me across rooms, brushing by me in tight spaces, each touch a little less accidental. I'd catch his smirk when Tom wasn't looking, like he knew I was fraying. And I was. The days blurred, me dodging him finding ways to close the gap. One afternoon I was in the basement sorting old junk when he came down. The stairs creaked and I looked up. There he was, leaning on the rail, eyes glinting in the dim light. "Need a hand?" he asked, but it wasn't about boxes. I stood, dusting my hands, heart kicking. "I've got it," I said sharp, but he didn't budge. He stepped closer, the air turning thick, musty with old paint and tension. "Sarah," he said, low, "you're running out of reasons." My throat closed up. He was right. I'd been dodging, deflecting, but the excuses felt thin now. He reached past me, grabbing a crate, his arm brushing mine, and lingered there, close enough I could feel his breath. "Riley," I muttered. "Tom's upstairs." He didn't flinch. He's always upstairs. The crate hit the floor and his hand found mine, not grabbing, just resting, warm and sure. My resolve cracked, a shiver running through me. I pulled away, stumbling back, but he followed, slow, deliberate, until I hit the wall. His voice dropped, rough. "You want this too, I know you do." I shook my head, but it was weak and he saw it. The basement door swung open. Tom, yelling about a phone call. Riley stepped off, casual, like nothing, but his eyes burned into me as he climbed the stairs. I stayed down there, gripping the wall, trying to breathe. That night, Tom was out, somebody's birthday, and the house felt too big, too quiet. I was in the living room, curtains drawn, when Riley walked in. No preamble this time. He sat close, thigh pressed to mine, the couch sinking under us. "Sarah," he said, soft but firm. "No more games." My hands clenched in my lap, but I didn't move. His fingers traced my arm, slow, testing. And when I didn't stop him, he leaned in, close, closer, his breath hot on my neck. "Tell me no," he whispered, lips brushing my ear. I couldn't. My head tipped back, a shaky exhale slipping out, and his hand slid to my waist, pulling me in. The room spun, guilt and want tangling tight, and then his mouth found mine, soft at first, then hungry, like he'd been holding back too long. My hands fisted his shirt, tugging him closer, and everything, Tom, the house, the rules, melted away. It was just us, reckless and real, the couch creaking under the weight of it. He pulled back, breathless, eyes dark. "Sarah," he said, voice raw. "You're sure?" I nodded, trembling, and he kissed me again, harder, deeper, his hands roaming now, unbuttoning, exploring. My sweater hit the floor, his shirt followed, and the air turned feverish, skin on skin, no space left between us. It wasn't slow or careful. It was a rush, a crash, every touch lighting me up until I couldn't think, couldn't stop. After we lay there, tangled, breathless, the TV still muttering in the background. Reality crept back. Tom could walk in, the clock was ticking, but Riley's arms stayed around me, heavy, warm. "This changes everything," he murmured, and I nodded, staring at the ceiling, knowing he was right. The next morning, Tom was back, clueless, while Riley shot me looks over breakfast, quiet, loaded. I burned toast, fumbled mugs, my mind stuck on the couch, on him. We'd crossed it now, no going back, and the pull only tightened, daring us deeper. Tom shuffled in, yawning, griping about his buddy's bad karaoke, and I nodded, forcing a smile, my mind stuck on Riley's breath against my neck. We didn't talk about it, not then. The house buzzed with normal noise, dishes clinking, Tom's truck starting, but under it something new pulsed, alive and restless. Riley didn't push, but he didn't retreat either. He'd linger in doorways, watching me fold towels or brush my arm grabbing a glass, small moves, deliberate, stoking the fire we'd lit. I tried to act steady, cooked dinner, swept floors, but every time he was near, my pulse jumped, my resolve thinning. Tom didn't see it, too caught up in his own world, ranting about spark plugs while I stared at the stove, Riley's footsteps echoing upstairs. One night, Tom crashed early. Long day, he said, leaving the house dim and still. I was in the kitchen wiping counters I'd already cleaned when Riley slipped in. He didn't say a word, just leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, eyes locked on me. I kept wiping, pretending, but the cloth slowed, my hands betraying me. "Sarah," he said, low, stepping closer. "You okay?" I nodded, too fast, not looking up. Fine. He didn't buy it. Moved in, close enough I could smell his soap, his heat. You're not, he murmured, voice soft but sure. His hand caught mine, stopping the cloth, fingers curling around my wrist again, warm, firm, like that night. My breath hitched, and he tugged me gently, turning me to face him. Riley, I started, weak. Tom's asleep, he finished, stepping closer, boxing me against the counter. His free hand brushed my cheek, thumb tracing my jaw, and I shivered. Caught. We can't keep circling, he said, eyes dark, searching. I knew he was right. This wasn't fading. It was growing, clawing at us both. His lips found mine again, slower this time, deliberate, tasting like certainty. My hand slid up his chest, hesitant then hungry, and he pressed me back, the counter digging into my spine. It wasn't rushed like before. Every move lingered, every touch deeper, unraveling me piece by piece. The fridge hummed, the clock ticked, but it was just us, his hands under my shirt, my fingers in his hair, a quiet storm swallowing the night. After he didn't pull away, stayed close, forehead against mine, breathing uneven. This is us now, he whispered, and I nodded, shaky, knowing it was true. The next day, Tom left for a weekend job, some out-of-town gig, and the house emptied out, leaving me and Riley alone. It should have scared me, that space, that chance, but it didn't. He found me in the living room, daylight streaming in, and sat close, too close, his knee pressed to mine. Sarah, he said, voice steady, no more hiding. His hand rested on my thigh, warmed through my jeans, and I didn't flinch. Leaned into it instead, my own hand covering his. We didn't rush this time, moved slow, deliberate, upstairs to his room, door clicking shut. The bed creaked under us, sheets tangling as we shed clothes, sunlight cutting stripes across his skin. It was different, open, raw, no ticking clock pushing us. His hands mapped me, steady and sure, and I let go, fully, finally, every doubt drowned in the weight of him. Hours later, we lay there, spent, his arms slung over me, the house quiet except our breaths. What happens when Tom's back? I murmured, staring at the ceiling. Riley shifted, propping up, eyes serious. We figure it out, together. I nodded, but the question lingered, heavy as his touch. That weekend stretched. Days of us, nights of him, the line between wrong and right blurring into nothing. Monday loomed, Tom's return ticking closer, and Riley grew bolder, kissing me in the kitchen, pulling me to him in the hall like he was staking a claim. I didn't stop him, couldn't, and each time the tangle of us tightened, knotting deeper. Then Sunday night, headlights swept the drive. Tom, early. We froze, half-dressed in the living room, and reality crashed back cold and hard. Tom's headlights slicing through the dark jolted us upright. Riley and me, tangled on the living room floor, shirts half on, breath still ragged. The engine cut off, gravel crunching under his boots, and panic surged through me like ice water. Riley moved first, quiet, fast, grabbing his hoodie, tossing me my sweater. Upstairs, he hissed, and I bolted, bare feet slapping the steps, heart hammering as the front door creaked open. I dove into bed, yanking the covers up, while Riley's door clicked shut down the hall. Tom trudged in, muttering about a canceled job, dropping his bag with a thud. "Sarah?" he called, voice rough but clueless. "Yeah, in here," I croaked, faking sleepiness, praying my flush didn't show in the dim light. He didn't check, just flopped beside me, out cold in minutes. I lay there, wide awake, Riley's scent still clinging to me, the close call burning in my chest. Morning broke gray and heavy. Tom was up early, banging around the kitchen while I stayed in bed staring at the wall, replaying every second of that weekend. Riley's hands, his voice, the way we'd filled the empty house. Guilt gnawed at me, sharp and new, but it didn't erase the pull, it sharpened it. Riley came down later, hair mussed, acting normal, too normal, grabbing juice, tossing Tom a hay like nothing. But when Tom turned to the sink, Riley's eyes hit mine, brief, blazing, a promise stitched into the silence. We didn't get a moment alone that day. Tom stuck around, fixing a leaky faucet, watching TV. But Riley found ways to speak without words. A brush of his shoulder as he passed, a finger tracing the counter near my hand, each move a thread tying us tighter. Night fell and Tom stayed up late, some old western flickering on the screen. I slipped upstairs, claiming a headache, but really I needed space, air that wasn't thick with Riley's nearness. I stood at the window, curtains parted, staring at the moon, when my door eased open. Riley, shadow quiet, stepped in, locking it behind him. "Riley," I whispered, sharp. "Tom's downstairs," he cut in, crossing the room, "and I don't care." He stopped an inch away, hands flexed at his sides, eyes boring into mine. "I can't keep acting like this didn't happen." My mouth went dry, the room tilting. "We have to," I said, but it sounded hollow, and he knew it. He reached out, slow, cupping my face, thumb brushing my lip. "No, we don't." His kiss came soft, then fierce, and I melted into it, hands gripping his arms, the bed creaking as we sank down. It was reckless, Tom right below us, but that edge only fueled it, every touch urgent, muffled, a secret carved in the dark. He left before dawn, silent as he'd come, and I stayed awake, sheets twisted, the weight of it settling in. Days after we stole moments, quick, jagged. A closet during Tom's shower, the shed when he mowed the lawn, each one a risk, a rush, binding us deeper. But Tom wasn't blind forever. One afternoon he came home early, truck silent in the drive, and caught Riley's hand on my waist in the pantry. Brief, but enough. "What the hell?" he roared, face red, fist clenched. I froze, Riley stepping back, but the air snapped taut, no dodging it now. "Tom, I started, voice breaking, but he stormed out, door slamming, leaving silence thicker than before. Riley looked at me, steady despite the chaos. "He knows," he said, flat, no regret. I nodded, numb, the house suddenly too big, too empty. Hours later, Tom came back, quiet, cold, eyes hard. "We need to talk," he said, sitting heavy at the table, and I knew this wasn't just anger. It was the end of something. Riley stayed upstairs, but his shadow loomed, inescapable. Tom didn't yell, didn't need to. "How long?" he asked, voice like gravel. I couldn't lie, not fully. "Not long," I said, soft, hating the truth in it. He stared, then laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Guess I'm the fool." He didn't ask for details, didn't want them. Just stood, grabbed his keys, and left again, the quiet swallowing me whole. Riley came down after, finding me curled on the couch, eyes wet. "Sarah," he said, kneeling, hand on my knee, "we're in this now." And as the night stretched on, Tom's absence echoing, I wondered what this even meant. Us, alone. The wreckage still smoking around us. Tom's truck didn't roll back into the drive that night, or the next. The house stayed hollow, his chair at the table empty, his tools untouched in the garage. I moved through it like a ghost, coffee going cold in my hands, while Riley kept close, too close, his presence a tether and a weight all at once. That talk with Tom had cracked everything open, his "guess I'm the fool" ringing in my ears, sharp as a blade. I'd tried calling him once, twice, straight to voicemail, his silence louder than any fight. Riley didn't push me to talk about it, just stayed, steady, filling the gaps Tom left behind. Morning after he walked out, Riley found me in the kitchen, staring at the sink, dishes piled from a meal I didn't eat. He didn't say much, just slid behind me, hands light on my shoulders, chin brushing my hair. "He'll come back," he murmured, like he wasn't sure either. I turned, meeting his eyes, tired, certain, no trace of doubt about us. "And then what?" I asked, voice raw. He didn't answer, just pulled me in, arms tight, and I let him, sinking into the warmth, the guilt and want still wrestling inside me. Days dragged, and Tom's absence carved a new routine. Riley took over, Fixed the faucet Tom ignored, mowed the lawn, cooked eggs when I couldn't. It wasn't loud or showy, just him, stepping in, like he'd already claimed the space. I'd catch myself watching him, shirt damp with sweat, hands steady on a wrench, and feel the pull tighten, a thread I couldn't cut. One afternoon, rain drumming the roof, we ended up in the attic, sorting old boxes, dust thick in the air. He found a photo, me and Tom years back, smiling young, and held it up, brow raised. "You miss him?" he asked, voice even. I took it, fingers brushing his, and shrugged. "Parts of him." He nodded, setting it aside, then moved closer, knee bumping mine on the creaky floor. "And me?" His hand slid to my neck, thumb tracing my pulse. I swallowed, caught. "You're here." It wasn't an answer, but he took it, kissed me slow, deep, the rain a curtain around us, drowning the past. That night he didn't go back to his room, stayed in mine, bed dipping under him, his breath steady beside me. It felt wrong, then right, then just real. Tom's side cold, Riley's warm. A week later, Tom called. I picked up, heart lurching, his voice flat through the line. "I'm at the motel. Need my stuff." No yelling, no pleas, just done. I packed a bag, shirts, socks, his old watch, hands trembling, Riley watching from the doorway. "You okay?" he asked, soft. I nodded, but my chest ached, a knot of endings and beginnings I couldn't untie. Tom showed up at dusk, face carved with lines I hadn't noticed before. He didn't look at Riley, just took the bag, eyes on me, hard but tired. "You chose this," he said, low, and left, truck fading into the dark. The house settled, quieter than ever, and Riley stepped up behind me, hand on my waist. "It's us now," he said, firm, and I leaned back, letting it sink in. Tom gone, Riley here, the shift complete. Next morning, we didn't pretend anymore. Ate breakfast together, his hand on my thigh, no shadows to dodge. But the town wasn't blind. Whispers started, neighbors' stares, a cashier's raised brow, and Riley felt it too, his jaw tight when we walked past. "They'll talk," he said one day, tossing keys on the counter. "Let them," I replied, but my voice wavered, the weight of eyes pressing in. One night a brick crashed through the window, glass shattering, a scrawled note, "Homewrecker." Riley cursed, sweeping it up, while I stood frozen, the word cutting deeper than the shards. "We can leave," he said, fierce, grabbing my hand. "Start over." I looked at him, steady, defiant, and nodded, the idea blooming, wild and sharp. We packed light, clothes, cash, a few photos, his truck rumbling to life under a moonless sky. The house faded in the rearview, a shell of what was, and Riley's hand found mine, gripping tight. "Where to?" he asked, voice low. "Anywhere," I said. And as the road stretched out, dark and open, the past loosened its hold, a new edge rising ahead. The truck's engine growled steady under us, headlights cutting through the black as Riley drove, his hand still locked with mine. The town shrank to a speck in the mirror, its whispers, its broken glass, its judgment fading with every mile. I leaned against the window, cool against my cheek, the hum of the road lulling my racing thoughts. We didn't talk much, didn't need to, just let the silence settle, heavy but not suffocating. "Anywhere," I'd said, and he'd nodded like it was enough. Dawn crept up slow, painting the sky bruised purple, and we stopped at a diner off some nowhere highway, greasy spoons, flickering neon, a jukebox crooning old country. Riley slid into the booth across from me, eyes softer now, less guarded. "You hungry?" he asked, pushing a menu my way. I shrugged, managing a small smile. "Starving." We ate, pancakes, bacon, coffee too strong, stealing glances between bites, the weight of last night still clinging but lighter here, out of that house's shadow. He reached over, brushing syrup from my thumb, and held on a second too long, a quiet claim in the touch. Days bled into weeks on the road, motels with thin walls, gas stations with stale chips, towns blurring past, We landed in a speck of a place, dusty streets, a bar, a rickety house for rent cheap. No one knew us, no stairs followed, and it felt like breathing again. Riley found work at a lumber yard, coming home with sawdust in his hair, while I stitched curtains, turned the place into something ours. Nights we'd sit on the porch, his arm around me, the air thick with crickets and possibility. But the past wasn't gone, just quiet. One morning a letter came, Tom's scrawl forwarded from the old address. My hands shook opening it, no threats, no rage, just short. Sold the house, keep the rest. A check fluttered out, half the sale, a clean cut. Riley watched me read, jaw tight. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, folding it away. "Yeah, it's done." He pulled me close, and I let the ache dissolve, the last tie snapping soft. Life settled, simple, steady. Riley's laugh filling rooms, my hands finding his in the dark. But one night headlights swept the yard, unfamiliar, slow. A truck idled, then peeled off, leaving tire tracks and a prickle up my spine. Riley saw it too, stepping outside, eyes narrow. "Trouble?" I asked, joining him. He shook his head, but his grip on my hand tightened. "Not yet." Weeks later it came, a knock, sharp, midday. I opened the door, Riley at my back, and there stood a man, tall, weathered, Tom's cousin from years back. "Heard you were here," he said, voice flat, eyes flicking between us. "Tom's gone. Crashed last month. Drunk." My stomach dropped, air thinning. Riley's arm slid around me, steadying. "Sorry," I managed, faint. The man shrugged. "Thought you'd want to know." He left, no goodbye, and the door shut, silence crashing in. Riley turned me to him, hands framing my face. "Sarah," he said soft, "you're here, with me." I nodded, tears stinging, guilt and grief tangling fresh, but his hold anchored me, pulling me through. Months passed, the shock dulled, and we built on, planted a garden, fixed the roof, let time smooth the edges. One evening, Riley knelt in the dirt, grinning up at me, dirt-streaked and real. "Marry me," he said. No ring, just him. I laughed, shaky, and said yes, the word light, final. The ceremony was small, courthouse, 2 strangers as witnesses, and we drove home, windows down, his hand on my thigh, a new start sealed in the dust. Years later, sitting on that same porch, gray in my hair, his laugh deeper, I'd trace the scars. Tom's loss, the town's hate, the road that brought us here. Riley'd catch my eye, still sharp, still mine, and I'd know it was worth it. The mess, the wreckage, the fight. The past lingered, a shadow, but the life we'd carved shone brighter, rooted deep in the quiet we'd claimed.